today we're going to be talking about biodynamics in the vineyard and then the resulting wines. And this is a really interesting and important topic for Epoch, but not one that we publicize a lot or we talk about a lot. So I'm really excited to dive in today and talk more about it to you guys. So who we have joining us today, we've got Kyle Gingras, who is our vineyard manager. He's going to wave. He's got the Epoch hat on. And so we'll hear a lot from him about biodynamics. And if you tuned in last week, I've got my co-host here, which is Zack Musick. He's tuning in from Southern California, but he is the head sommelier beverage director at Merriman's restaurants on Hawaii. So he's in charge of several different wine lists for that restaurant group. And then we also have Raphael Santos from the 2 Michelin star, I got that right? Acquerello restaurant in San Francisco. So we were all lucky enough to meet and hang out and get to know each other during the Wine Speak event in Paso Robles in January, which is this incredible event that mixes winemakers and wine growers with sommeliers, restaurateurs, and consumers. And I cannot speak highly enough about it. So if you ever have the opportunity to travel, wait, I said that wrong. If you ever are in Paso Robles the 1st or 2nd week of January, you definitely need to stay for that event because travel will be happening in the future. So I first want to say, please start drinking whatever wine you have in front of you. Don't wait until we start. Well, we actually have started, but until we talk about the actual wine in our glasses. Hopefully you have an Epoch in your glass, and more specifically, we are going to be talking about our white wine, but any Epoch will do because it's all from our own grapes. And I feel that, and I think everyone feels this way, that our white or a lighter red, like our sensibility, are really good to talk about when we are trying to convey the idea of expressing our soil and our land in your glass, because those wines are lighter style wines, while the white is lighter, and then the sensibility is our lightest red, and wines that sort of aren't masked by any kind of oak usage or just trying to be more full and bigger. So those are really good wines to have when we're talking about terroir or expressing the site in the wine. So a little bit about the background of biodynamics at Epoch. When I came to Epoch in 2010, I moved here from Northern California. I actually had met Raphael years ago when I was at Chalk Hill, and he remembered, which really warmed my heart.
Yeah.
I moved here. I was amazed. It's been 10 years. And I moved to Paso Robles and to Epoch specifically, where we're 100% estate grown, where the owners of Epoch, Bill and Liz Armstrong, are both geologists and had decided to buy property and plant grapevines here specifically because of the special rocks that we have, which in turn affects the soils and then the climate. And so the idea when we all first started talking was to have wines that showed where they were grown, which is what basically all high-end winemakers around the globe try to do. So I came here just with that as the goal. I want to produce wines that express the soils, and I want to use the least amount of inputs to do that because it just seems obvious. Less inputs, more expression of soil, because the vine's roots will go down into the earth and absorb what is there. So I experienced 2010 vintage. After that, I knew that I didn't have a clear path on how to achieve that goal. And more specifically, our second vineyard, which is our Catapult vineyard, was really struggling with commercial farming. It just was, the vines weren't growing well. They're having a really difficult time. And so I knew I needed to try something different. And I started looking into alternative approaches to farming. I knew that I didn't want to sort of do this hydroponic type farming where you're feeding the vine through a drip vine, its water, its nutrients, everything that it needed to survive, because that means you could grow it on a piece of concrete somewhere maybe and not on our soils. And so then flashing back in 2001, I was able to work the harvest at a Rajo estate in Napa Valley. And they are a super high-end winery that was biodynamically farmed. And that was just part of the game. And it was so imbalanced, and it just always stuck in my mind. So I had this experience of very high-end winemaking through biodynamic farming. And so that is what I started to explore. So after the 2010 vintage, I was looking for a vineyard manager. I was in charge of the vineyards, and we used a vineyard management company, and it was just, I don't know how I slept that vintage. It was, I remember, it was definitely the blood, sweat, and tears vintage. So if you have any of those bottles, you definitely have those things in them from me. And so at the beginning of, I think it was like March of 2011, started looking for a vineyard manager, and that's where I found Kyle. And he was like really young at that point. But he's from Santa Maria, and he actually had experience farming biodynamically at what was then Presidio Vineyards and is now Duverita in Lompoc. It's become a very famous Pinot Noir vineyard in the area. And not only did he have experience, but he believed in biodynamic farming. And he was young, but he was driven, and he had worked hard in vineyards ever since, I think he was like 16 or 17. So he came on and worked with us, and yeah, it's been amazing ever since. We hired Philippe Armenier as our biodynamic consultant, and we actually changed our vineyard management, or sort of who we get labor from in the vineyard. We changed that company as well. And it's kind of just been, you know, let's do what's right for the vineyard since then. And we started Biodynamics in 2011 at our Catapult Vineyard, and we were just astounded, as were all of our neighbors, at how amazing that vineyard looked from the moment we turned it around to Biodynamics. So I would like to say the proof is in the pudding, which is actually a really good saying for wine. And I can't stress this enough, and maybe we'll come up with it again, but I had no agenda with Biodynamics. We did not do it for marketing. We barely even talk about it now, because we believe that we're tasked with the goal of doing what's right for the vineyard, to make the best wine and to leave the earth in a better place than the way we found it. And so it's kind of, to me, it's important that people, and I think France has this dialed, as does Italy, you do what's right for the vineyard. And for us, that was turning it to biodynamic farming. And we're not certified. We don't really have a desire to be, because of our goal of becoming biodynamic was really just to give you what you deserve at this price point in the glass. So we'll kind of come back to that idea, but it's for what's right. It makes us pay so much attention to the vines and the land just inherently through the process. And I think that's where sort of it's the key. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what biodynamics is and what we're doing at Epoch. And as a generalization, it's a focus on soil health. And so with that, I'm going to let Kyle talk. You guys keep drinking, and we'll get into the nitty gritty.
That sounds good. I'm definitely doing a lot of drinking. I hope you guys do the same.
Yeah, Kyle.
So yeah, I think thank you guys for joining. It's great to have you guys on the line, Zach and Raphael. Thank you so much for being here. So when I think of biodynamics, for me, it comes down to the idea that it's like a very specific sect of organic farming, if you will. It's like organics and then extra credit, if you will. So it definitely has like all the OMRI certified organic at its foundation, but then it incorporates these very specific biodynamic preparations or sprays, if you will, that we use in the vineyard. And so, like Jordan touched on a minute ago, what we're trying to do with biodynamics is really rebuild the health of the soil that we have. So with chemical or conventional farming, like Jordan said, it's really kind of a means of hydroponics, really. You're removing the soil from the equation with your farming system, and you're kind of spoon feeding the vines directly with these synthetic chemicals, nutrients that they need, and it works, but it kind of takes that sense of place away. And so when you move into an organic spectrum, you're still using, you know, chemical fertilizers, but they're more naturally occurring. They're not synthesized, you know, in a manufacturing plant somewhere. And that movement was a big movement to kind of stop the degradation of the soils of your farm. And so, which was a huge step. That's like definitely a step in the right direction, right? But with biodynamics, we come into a realm where we're actually trying to improve the health of the soil and actually build it back up. So we're using inputs such as composting and cover cropping, which exist in organic farms as well. But we're using inputs like that to really build up this microbiome and this like huge organic matter within the soil, so that the vines are actually thriving for a much longer lifespan, if you will. So where biodynamics comes into play, they have a huge focus on that soil health. And when we get to composting, you're seeing slides, by the way, of some pictures that are very relevant to biodynamics. So you'll see some compost piles and different things in there. So feel free to pop up questions as you want. But when we're doing composting with biodynamics, it gets very specific, and there's a set of what are called preparations that go into the compost pile that really facilitate with the nutrient cycling and building that microbiology within the pile to do the compost action. So another element that that's unique to biodynamics is that it's trying to bring in the world of the animal into the world of the plant, if that kind of makes sense. So there's a big relationship with cattle, specifically dairy cattle. And so when we do these compost piles, excuse me, they are a majority dairy cow manure that we blend in quite a bit amount of a carbon source, like a straw or a dried hay element into that pile. And that's basically the nuts and bolts of our composting. And really, when we look at the compost, it's also like the nuts and bolts of our nutrient plan for the vineyard. So like Jordan said, we try to pull back on how many inputs that we're using in the vineyard to really show their sense of place. And really the main input that we have is our compost. It's our nutrient source, it's our organic matter source, and it's our microbiology source, which is huge for the soil. And so from there, we have kind of our cover cropping program, which really ties in well with the compost. And we select a legume mix for our cover crops, and we're trying to find different ways that we can use cover crop more effectively. But legumes have a unique ability to put nitrogen into the soil from the atmosphere. And so we use those quite a bit throughout the vineyards to help boost some of our nutrient program. But their root systems also give us a huge amount of organic matter as well once we mow them down in the spring and they kind of start to desiccate. And so we're creating this huge organic matter mass within the soil. And what that does, it provides us with these nutrient exchange sites for the vines to uptake the nutrients that they need. And those nutrients are coming from the microbiology that are cycling those nutrients from the soil. And so you kind of have this like perfect world of organic matter creating structure and creating these charged sites for the nutrients to cling onto that are coming from the microbiology that's cycling these nutrients from the soil during the winter months. So those are kind of our big, elements as far as building the health of the soil. And then when we get into the actual growing, that happens all in the fall. And when we get into the growing season, when the vines start to come out of dormancy, we have really 2 to 3 main sprays that are specific to biodynamics that are preparations. And one of them, the first one of the season, is the BD 500, which is the horn manure. It's probably one of the most famous preps. People like to talk about it, maybe even poke fun at it a bit. But it's the first spray that we have in the season. And what that spray does, what that preparation is meant for, is to play with energies, if you will. So I've failed to mention, with biodynamics, they take into consideration the cosmos, and they like to play with like energy fields or forces, if you will. And so plants are very unique in the sense that they have like this opposing natural pull of kind of gravities, if you will. They have a gravity of their root system that's pulling down into the soil of the earth, but then they also have this natural pool reaching upward up to the sky. And so these first two spray preparations that we have, 500, which is the horn manure, and the 501, which is the horn silica, excuse me, they're playing with those kind of gravitational pulls of the plant. So we spray the 500 in the spring on the soil, which is to help reinforce the energies of the root systems diving down deep into our soil profile. And then a little bit later on in the growing season, when the canopies are large enough, we spray the BD 501, which is the horn silica. And that is to reinforce the energies of the vines wanting to reach up towards the sky and have kind of encourage this affinity for the sunlight that they have. So really, in a nutshell, to circle back, that's the foundation of biodynamics in a totality and for us, is that they have this huge influence on a composting program. And then they have the kind of two key sprays that are sprayed directly for the vines out in the field to kind of emphasize their natural pools down into the earth and up into the sky, which is very unique to plants.
Kyle, so Steve Hewitt had a question, and that when you did, so this was the first year, the pictures that we had done the cow horn preparation, because we actually got longhorn cows. And he was asking how much acreage did that get applied to what you produced?
So it was our first time making that 500 on site. And we did it at our York Mountain Vineyard site, which is our youngest site here at Epoch. And in totality, it's just under 22 acres. So we used that for just the York Mountain Vineyard site this year for all 22 acres.
Yeah, so and then we also got the question of, do you guys cater your biodynamic farming to specific sites, which I had answered on the chat. That's where our Biodynamic Consulting comes in, because Philippe Arminet and Kyle, and when I can join, I join. They go around the different properties at least once a month during the growing season, and they look and see what's happening. And then they can make different applications of what might be needed based on what they're seeing, or they'll make a note for the compost for the next year if something needs to be added to it because it's deficient. Like in the winery and the vineyard, we're very much like, we want to analyze what's going on in the petioles and how much nutrient the vines have, but we don't really want to rock the boat by making huge turns of the wheel. We want to get there slowly with time. We want to have all the information, but not necessarily act on it.
That's right. That's right. And something that's maybe not necessarily specific to biodynamics, but something that we do often per Philippe's direction is that we will make these like teas, if you will, that we can either apply to the soil or spray directly on the foliage of the vines to help correct any subtle nutrient deficiencies that we might see. So like one thing out at the Poderesky Vineyard for us is we have these limestone soils, and the pH of the soil is really high. And so what that does is it kind of creates an iron deficiency for the grapevines, and the leaves can come out, especially this time of year in the spring, they can come out kind of yellow because they're not pulling up enough iron due to the pH, the high pH of the soil. And so what we can do to kind of correct those occurrences is we can make a tea out of, let's say, stinging nettle. And what stinging nettle does, it is a great plant that mineralizes iron from the soil that it grows in. So it has a huge amount of iron within it, and we'll literally make a tea of the leaves of the plant and then put it into our spray rigs and apply it foliarly to help correct those chlorosis issues of the leaves. So that was just an example, but if we see different things at different years that come up like that, we can use different herbs and make these different teas to help correct little nutrient deficiencies along the way as needed.
Ariana asked a question, where do you source your plants for the teas from? Do you try to grow them near site?
We've talked about growing it on site, and like we were just talking about the horn manure, we just started making some of our own preps in-house this last year, and that is a dream for us to to get to that point. And there's a place up in Oregon that we actually source our herbs from. I can't think of the name right now, but it's up north, which is an organic certified farm, and they are able to get us all of our different herbs that we need.
Yeah, I just got stung by stinging nettle down by the creek bed on York Mountain, so I know we have that here. That's never happened to me before, and it is, wow, I'm amazed that it has good properties, because it has a lot of bad properties too. Awesome, Kyle. Thank you. So now I want to sort of turn it into the wine conversation and bring the sommeliers in, because they're so amazing. So first, I want to find out what the Somm world thinks about biodynamic wines, which you guys are noticing when you taste biodynamic wines versus not. I mean, with Epoch, you wouldn't necessarily know because we don't write it on the label, but now you know. But if you could comment on that a little bit, and then go.
Yeah, I mean, I always think, I mean, a lot of biodynamic producers, they create this kind of transparency in terms of their winemaking, and they create a wine that has that sense of place, you know, because that's really what you want to kind of come through when farming biodynamically, is you want there to be this kind of integrity to the varietal, and you get that minerality, and you get the terroir, which you want to see when you're farming that way. And you really don't want to cover that up as a winemaker. And I think those tend to be the wines that I want to have on my list. You know, you don't want a wine that, I think I said last time, that has a bunch of lipstick on it, that's been kind of doctored up to represent the style that, you know, that winery thinks people want to drink. You know, you guys create wines that are very specific to those vineyard sites, and it shows through, and those varietals show through. So, you know, if you're going to jump it from, you know, 47% Grenache Blanc up to 53%, you notice that difference, and you're not changing it in any sort of way. And you know that if you're getting more from Paderewski vineyard rather than Catapult, you kind of get those differences because of the slightly different soil types. Like you were saying, like more iron in the soil or anything like that. I think from like a sommelier point of view, we want to have that show through. And same thing, vintage to vintage. I mean, you want to be able to notice the difference between the 2016 that we're drinking and the 2019. And I think that people that are more concerned with creating a more consistent style and just being able to make, like, you know, the best wine every vintage, or what in their eyes is the best vintage, rather than making a wine that shows those varietals, that is like showcasing those sites that you have, and showcasing your farming practices and everything that Kyle does in the vineyard site. I think that tends to show through. And from a buyer's point of view and a sommelier's point of view, I think that's, for me, is the most important in having something that is slightly more expressive overall.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I want to say, oak is a wonderful tool. It can be completely bastardized and overused. So it's the way that you use it that, and we touched on that, I think, a little bit more last time, because we were doing Ingenuity, which definitely has new oak in it, but we can talk about that on another topic. So it's not that oak is evil, but it has been used in a very sort of perverted way. A lot of
and I think too, like, I mean, what you do, the connection between you two is always really important, because you know, you need to have, like, a lot of, you know, winemakers that are making wines in the more natural way, or just buying fruit from these growers and then trying to kind of make a wine in a more natural way, where you have a connection with your vineyard manager, and you kind of have this idea, this like foresight into what you want your wine to be. And you do certain things, you know, in the cellar and with your winemaking techniques that kind of showcase those characteristics rather than cover them up, you know?
Yeah, totally. I'll
so
come
true.
up.
Yeah, when I started at Epoch,
Sorry. I was going to say, is super important, because when back in 2011, when we were deciding to make that change from that kind of conventional chemical approach to farming to biodynamics, it's kind of a big jump and a big leap of faith. And, you know, we were a brand that was already producing wines that way. And the last thing that you want to see is something like where you fall back in quality because you're making this, you know, quote unquote radical change in your farming approach. So it was kind of a big, you know, leap of faith, and like, here, let's grab hands and let's go, you know, and it's been nothing but awesome. So I just wanted to add that in there.
It was definitely scary, but I feel like that was 10 years ago, and maybe, I don't know, if you're younger, you're more willing to take chances, because I just had this sort of like tunnel vision about it. And then I think also because I'm from Georgia and my dad actually grows grapes in Georgia, and I know how difficult that climate is. And so then when I've been in California, it's been like, oh my gosh, the disease pressure, the insect pressure, someone just had a question about insects, is so much lower. So you have this ability to, or this, you're almost obligated to use less inputs because you're in this drier, warmer, more arid, you know, climate that can allow that easily. It's not easy, but it's easier. And so why not? It's what's right for the land. You should be doing it. So I want to let Raphael weigh in a little bit on biodynamics in San Francisco and all the biodynamic wines. What's going on?
I mean, for me, it's like, I always like to work back. You know, I go like super generic. The first thing that I look for as a buyer, as a sommelier, is like, is it delicious? You know, you taste the wine, and, you know, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, that you know beforehand that it's biodynamic, organic, or something like that. But you taste the wine, and then you see what it is in the glass. And then when you find out, you know, a little bit later on, it's biodynamic, it makes a little bit more sense. Where, you know, you get the flavor of the wine, you're like, oh, that's showing its, you know, its characteristics. May it be like showing, you know, the terroir in that area, may it be showing the varietal, you know, may it be showing the, just like the purity of the grape, etc. You know, I always like to go and focus on that first, and then you find out that, you know, they do, they just like have a little bit more care in kind of understanding their vineyards, etc. And so to me, the whole biodynamics thing really just, it first of all shows you as a buyer that, you know, the vineyard manager, the winemaker, the winery, they have a very intimate relationship with their vines, because that's kind of what biodynamics is, at least in my kind of more general understanding. Without getting into the specifics, it's like having a more instinctive relationship, a more intimate relationship with your land, with the vines, reacting to how your vines are kind of behaving, and kind of just understanding, you know, row per row, you know, what this row needs, what that row needs, and then how we could make that into like our wine. Yeah. And so that's kind of, you know, one of the big things, you know, for me. And a lot of people who do biodynamic farming, they actually put a lot more care, I find, you know, in really going towards like, you know, understanding their vines, and then also leaving the land a little bit better than how it was beforehand. And so it's that whole ecosystem that I think is extremely important. It's that, you know, you really care for the land. You are a steward of the land, as opposed to just, you know, using the land, harvesting the grapes, and then making something out of it. It's caring for it and understanding it, and, you know, being able to express it. And that's kind of one of the big things, at least for me.
Well, that's a great thing, to being able to express. So you can, all these beautiful grapes can arrive at the winery, and then you can just screw it up.
Yeah, exactly.
You can throw a lot of oak on it. You can over extract it. I mean, not even saying like what you did in the video. You could have overcropped it, but if they look good, chances are, all right, now what are we going to do? Right? It's kind of that. And it took many. And it's constantly moving up. Right? It's not static. It's constantly changing, and every vintage is different. Yeah, I mean, I definitely had a long look at ageability and showing terroir in the wines. So we can move that to the white, because it's more naked. It doesn't have a lot covering it. And we kind of, you know, we make the Grenache. We don't co-ferment this normally. It's Grenache Blanc Viognier. Actually, Viognier is picked first, and then Grenache Blanc, and then maybe some more Viognier, and then some more Grenache Blanc, and then the Roussanne. So it's all fermented, different picks. I don't pick one block all together. I pick the top of the block. I might pick the middle and then the bottom. I drive Kyle crazy during harvest. Then I don't remember what I did. And I ask him to tell me later what I did. So I can write
Am I supposed to remember that?
He has a book. We tried to get on a computer system that was available on the phones and everything with an app. And we all liked our handwritten stuff better. Because it's just weird to transfer, I think, the biodynamic farming and the specifics there to somebody's, matrix of 1 equals yes and 0 equals no. So the 16 and the 19, we're drinking the 2016 and 2019 white. So I just want to say the one thing that I've always thought is that I love the white with some age on it. When it's younger, it's fresher, it's got more like bubbly, bubblegummy, tropical, fresh fruit. But then as it ages, it gets more serious. And we definitely don't, if we use 1 new barrel every other year, it's a lot on this wine. So I'll kind of leave it at that. We ferment in concrete. We actually have a foudre now, and it's an oak cask from Burgundy that we're using on this wine. So the 19 is the first, I don't have the 19 here, but the 19 is the first vintage that we fermented and aged in that vessel as well. So I want to feel like I hope you guys are tasting some epic wine right now. If you have any ideas on what makes us different, post them on the chat. I'd love to hear from the Somms about what they're tasting in these 2 wines.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Jordan and I have talked about this recently. Like, I'm never really a big fan of white Rhone blends. I think it's really easy to mess up, and they tend to get a little bit dramatic, a little bit more like blousy, like they're overdone. If you harvest them too late, if you do anything where it's too much alcohol, you use too much oak, there's so many things that can go wrong with these blends, and it's hard to make a good white Rhone blend, especially when you think about kind of pairing these wines with food, and I think you do an incredible job. This tends to be one of my favorites. It's literally the only white Rhone blend from the New World that I have at our Wahoo restaurant, for a reason, because I think it is very food friendly. I think you harvest it early enough where it's got that brightness and that that energy behind it and that liveliness where it's not overdone. There's not too much of that florality. The acid is there too. You can pair it with something that is slightly more delicate. You don't need a big, massive, rich dish, which I think a lot of white Rhone blends kind of call for. But this is, it's fantastic. And
I had to restart the computer, and I finally got the connection.
Somebody's joined us right now.
There you go.
Yeah, I totally, in the market,
I had to restart the computer, and then I got it. I got internet.
No, I got it.
Oh, you did?
Joel's on. Okay.
But it was the internet. Oh, I see. So you got it too. Okay. So now I got this thing, but it's a Zoom meeting. So what I really want to do is see her. I don't care about these other people. Well, if you get on her, would just
We're having a little bit of technical difficulties.
Joel, we can hear you.
Obviously,
we all hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we've had a hard time with our distributors with is in the market, they do so well with foods, with fish dishes, with the lighter side, like Thai, Asian foods. I think it'd be great in Hawaii, but the distributors have a really hard time bringing it in because it doesn't sell very well.
Yeah, and I think that is because, like Ariana said, works at Roy's, she's amazing, by the way. She was on that same trip with us. She's been to the winery. she says that she's constantly surprised by the Rhone blends coming out of Paso, and I think a lot of that has to do with producers like yourselves that are like really thinking about the ageability and not creating these massive wines, and having that sense of place, I think is always really important. But yeah, I mean, some Rhone blends coming out of different areas, they just don't stand up to aging or to a lot of different food dishes. So I always appreciate you blending in the correct varietals too. I think that's tough. Have you had any troubles with deciding? Do you have any other white varietals planted that you don't use?
We did.
So on that note, I actually wanted to just expound on that and ask, like, what you think the different varietals that you use in your white wine kind of bring to the table. Obviously, like, being predominantly Rhone varietal based, winery, I understand like where that comes from, but like, what does, the Viognier, bring into the table, the Grenache Blanc, kind of both of those providing the structure, and then, what do those 3 grapes for the 19, kind of bring to the table? And I know they come from different sites, but, at the same time, just tasting these 2 wines, they're night and day. The 16 and the 19 to me are night and day, like, especially in the glass right now, having opened it like maybe 3-4 hours ago and just kind of tasting through it. It's really kind of come a long way, both of them. And so I'm interested to see like what those different varietals bring to the table for you. And, as what Zach was saying, what goes into that decision-making, what to put into the wine.
I think I'll let Kyle talk a little bit, and then I'll come in because I have a.
Well, I think part of it is naturally based off of the acreage that we have planted to each variety. So you're kind of working within things that are already there. Jordan and I always joke, it's like, with a vineyard, it's a perennial crop. So it's like every year you've got a vintage coming whether you're ready or not, right? So it's always coming. But
it's Kyle's harvest time, by the way, so we should thank him for being here with us today. He's so busy.
Spring is definitely sprung, and it's very, very compressed this year, so lots to do in a short period of time. But anyway, as far as the varietals go, we have specific amount of acreage dedicated to each, because that's how the vineyards are planted, and so we're dealing with that, and we can play with crop levels a little bit as we'd like. But I think what's interesting is, for the most part, like Jordan said, we're fermenting these varieties separately, unlike some of our reds that we co-ferment. And so we can really kind of track what these things are, and I'll let her kind of talk about how she approaches the blending. But what I find really interesting, or in a very simple way, is that the Viognier is not necessarily the best variety for some of our sites, because it can get a little bit warm for Viognier, and it makes this kind of like soapy, flowery thing. And so we have to be careful about how ripe we get it, so that we don't get those like bombastic aromatics and it comes across very like flabby and it loses its acid. But if we catch it right, we can accentuate those pretty aromatics. But moving even further west out to our York Mountain site, we actually planted quite a bit of Viognier because we were hedging our bets that it being a cooler site, that it would really thrive. And I don't know if anybody's opening that tonight or York Viognier has that, but that is just a really great site. Anyway, going back to the other varieties, the Grenache Blanc, I think it is amazing how it retains its acidity in these warmer climes. Both the Grenache Blanc and the Roussanne that we have are geared for those warmer sites, just like the Southern Rhone, right? And so it's amazing how Grenache Blanc really holds the acidity well and has these great like passion fruit characters and kind of like almost pineapple, if you will, when the wine is young. But as it ages, it really starts to mature, and it kind of evolves away from those really fresh fruit characters into kind of more like spiced fruit aromas. And then the Roussanne, I think kind of the little splash of it that we get and we use in the blend just kind of helps to like widen out that Syrian acidity that the Grenache Blanc can bring to the blend, and it kind of just integrates the whole palate into this more broad wine, and I think is really like the glue that holds that ageability for that bottling through and through. So those are my.
Yeah.
I've been on 7.5 hours of Zoom today.
So he's been on Zoom for a really long time, but Bill Armstrong's here.
Hey!
Hello.
Hey, mahalo.
Wait, are we 6 feet? We 6 feet apart?
That's okay. I think we're entering into the zone where you have your working clan, right? And you all are together. So, yeah.
So who do we have on here? How many people are watching here?
How many people are, I don't even know how many people are watching. But we've got Zack Musick right here. And he is the head Somm from the Merriman restaurants in Hawaii, and Raphael Santos on the right from Acquerello in San Francisco. We're talking biodynamics. I was telling them it was always my goal to make wines that express this amazing soil, because even Liz are geologists, and that was the goal. It was
That
just
was a huge deal from day one.
Just day one. It was very simple, and it's like I always tell Bill and I talk about keeping it simple, stupid. And it seems so simple, but it's really hard to do that. So
got that.
So many talks about doing biodynamic, but they really don't do biodynamic. So
yeah, I know. I think we had that conversation as well about like these people that get certified, but they don't really practice it. That's what's so great about, you know, Epoch is you guys, you don't flaunt the fact that you're biodynamic, but everybody's doing what's right for the soil. They have that like malama ka'aina that we always say.
yeah, exactly.
Actually, Kyle was going to talk about it, because when Kyle was talking, we're talking about the soil, that's good with everyone. Then you start talking about the cosmos, and people they're not really sure, and they're uncomfortable. And we're talking about the soil. We do all the things because we can do them, and we see better results. So we do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's ultimately really good for the land. It's just the right thing to do, and it's easier to farm non-biodynamic. You use pesticides, herbicides, blah, blah, blah. But in the long haul, you're doing the right thing, and it shows it in the wine. It really does. And so we've noticed a change. I've totally noticed a change in our wines since we started doing it. And yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah, so we talked about Catapult and how we did biodynamics first there, and everyone, even the neighbors like Eric Jensen on Anderson Road, because he's right next door to that vineyard, and Niners across, everyone said, what are you doing to this place? It looked like a moonscape before, and now it's alive. And then Paderewski's always kind of just been in its groove. Like it didn't really have a problem, but we just decided to do biodynamics there too, because with Kyle, we realized we could scale it, and with some of those pictures you saw, with some of the automation, we figured out how to scale and do what we think is important when we need to do it. And so we just did biodynamics there, and we just feel like the vines are healthier and they're going to have longer lives. And then when we planted York, we were able to start from the get-go.
Right. It's obvious here.
Yeah. It's just in harmony.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out, but you're talking about with the white, like how the biodynamics, it's really hard to pinpoint on it, but consistency I think is really important year to year. Someone asked, actually, I can't remember which one was, do you have any other variety? Did you try any other varieties? Yes. We tried Marsan. We tried Pickpool.
Yes.
You'll notice
I was
those.
going to ask about
Yeah, we've had some awesome failures, which we're not going to apologize for. You have to drill dry holes occasionally, and try it, doesn't work, and you pull it out and you trade up.
Try again.
Yep.
I would say the Pickpool wouldn't have worked, but what we had was virus, and it just that wine didn't work. We planted a little bit of Claret Blanche in the Paderewski, and that will be interesting. We'll see. We kind of got it co-planted with Grenache, and then we have a little bit on its own. So we start small, and then we build.
Yeah, I find that like talking to all the different winemakers out in Paso too, I mean, you notice that everybody is on the same train as you too. Everybody's, doing this kind of trial and error thing. If you talk to Justin Smith about his wine, we're like, oh, this has peak pool in it. That's so cool. And he's like, yeah, I pulled it all up. And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, I pulled all the peak pool up, and we're going to try something else next vintage. And we're like, oh, what? That's just crazy that it's changing that quickly. I mean, we were tasting stuff that was coming out of the barrel, and it was already changing over the amount of peak pool that he was using. So it's cool to see everybody in that area developing and constantly striving to be better and create the best wine that they can.
Definitely. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's like if you had like the soil type and the weather type, and you just like started painting by the numbers and say, okay, you need to put this varietal in this weather, in this soil. Well, that's not art. That's just painting by the numbers. So that's why I like the fact that we were like, try it, if it doesn't work, move on, even though on paper it should have been perfect, but it doesn't, you know, because at the end of the day, you don't know exactly what it's going to give you until you work on it.
So true. It's so true. It's, yeah. Yeah, I'm lucky we had as many successes as we did.
Yeah.
Because we have
That's some
wine
good
left.
successes. Yeah. So,
But yeah, especially planting York Mountain with the Viognier, we didn't know in the first vintage, we were just blown away, but it was so different. That was the other thing. So different than the other side.
And with the York Mountain, you have a bit more sand and sandstone there as opposed to the limestone and Paderewski, right?
yeah.
It's all, yeah, it's totally different.
Yeah, it's like a rock hard sandstone. It's crazy. It's fractured like the Paderewski, but it's just it's a well cemented sandstone. Even though we have a lot more rain up at York Mountain, because it's just a fractured sandstone, it just drains away like immediately. So we'll get rain in the winter, which we're finally finished now, and it stopped raining in April. We won't see a drop, and we can't even drill a well here for water. I mean, it is like it just drains away just like immediately. So it's just different. It's just different. It's not better or worse. It's just different.
Just different. Somebody asked, Steve Hewitt asked, Bill, how did Paso Robles end up with so many folks from Colorado? Epic, dinner.
It's hard to believe actually, because Dinner was my next door neighbor in Denver, Colorado, of all things. It was crazy.
It's a random coincidence, right?
And I was barely getting by, and then he walks by in front of my place, and I was out there mowing my yard or whatever, pulling weeds, and he goes, I'm moving to California, I'm gonna start a vineyard. And I'm like, I am so jealous right now. Anyway, I lost touch with him, and then like a decade later, when things were changing, I was out in Paso, and I was driving down the road, and I go, Dinner Vineyards? No way. This is my old next door neighbor from Denver. Yeah. So, and then I did talk Don Law into moving to Paso Robles, because he was thinking about Napa, and I went by and met him and met his wife, and I said, okay, you need to like try this area. And he came out and told us.
Yeah, I think all geologists, Don Law must be one too.
Yeah, he's a new old business.
Yeah.
So
they must you have to fall in love with the rocks here. There's a grape grower. He's the owner of the biggest vineyard management company in Santa Barbara County. And he would come up here and he would just drool because of the way the rocks are. I mean, it's just, you just can't help, but you get that feeling that this is a special place to grow grapes. And we try to make that happen in the wine too, to make that connection.
Yeah, that was one of the takeaways that I had with that early morning drive with Zach and everyone during Wine Speak. As soon as we entered the gate, we kind of like hung out to the left, and just looking at that limestone kind of wall. And it was just, it was fantastic. It was just every Somm that was in attendance was just nerding out, picking up rocks, taking pictures. Like, I mean, everyone was there. And then, you kind of, I know it was January, but then you feel like how cold it is in the morning, and you understand kind of why, Epoch wines kind of have this freshness. Like at the end of the day, it's like that's a common thread that I find in at least both of these wines that I'm tasting. Is like, you kind of get different characteristics, but at the end of it, it's like, oh yeah.
I know I can find the picture too, but I'm worried it might take a while. We have lots of pictures of that cut out, which is
that is awesome.
So literally a group of nerds just staring at a wall of rock for like way too long.
Yeah, I love
like,
it.
What,
There we go.
Look at you guys.
On the back of the truck.
So here is like, so during this quarantine, I am going freaking nuts. So I'm typically crazy. So I was listening to, this is total diversion from wine, but it's not. It'll get back to that outcrop is a guy named Nobel, who they named Nobel Prize for. He's the one who invented dynamite. And back in the day, there was nitroglycerin, and it was always explode all the time. And he figured out a way to like mixing nitroglycerin with diatomite, which is what we have on our soils at the Pedersty.
Oh.
And so he had mixed nitroglycerin with diatomite, and then when he came out with the product, he didn't know what to call it, so we call it dynamite.
Oh, so cool.
So when you drink our wine, it is dynamite. It's dynamite.
Yeah. Not only is it
That's obscure, but that's because I'm going freaking nuts with this sequestering in place. So that's my podcast.
I need a podcast. I was going to ask Bill. I need like a podcast or a book about geology that's actually really interesting and won't put me to sleep.
Yeah.
I want to learn more because I know what I
It'll
know.
put you to sleep. That's just like a great cure for insomnia.
We need someone to do a podcast. Maybe if they involve wine, it would actually really be, and dynamite.
Yeah, well now we know dynamite came from diatomite, which is what we have.
What we have.
Yeah.
Wow. Dynamite. That's a new wine for us.
Yeah. That's probably taken.
Yeah. We don't want rocket fuel. It's like, well, we're not trying
No,
to
definitely not. We don't call it nitroglycerin.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So someone asked about insects in the vineyard, and I think it was more of a beneficial question than it was a negative. So how do you influence the better insects? I want to make sure we touched on that one. Kyle?
Yeah, I'll touch on that briefly. Entomology can probably get quite boring, but
This is why we don't normally have these
Are we going to talk coronavirus? This is entomology, not entomology. All right, you lost me, Kyle. See you.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah. So that kind of makes me want to circle back to our cover cropping program, because with vineyards and them being deciduous and they lose their leaves during the winter months and go into a state of dormancy, and that they're, kind of a permanent installed crop, a perennial, we don't really have a means of crop rotation, if you will, but using our cover crop in between the vine rows is our crop rotation. Plus it gives, a nice ground cover, kind of gets us away from that monoculture, if you will, and it gives a place for insects to do overwintering and keep those populations rolling when there be otherwise maybe no growth out in the vineyard scape. So that's something that's really big to help keep things rolling. And then one of our big kind of issues that we have to deal with here in Paso is powdery mildew, which is a kind of a fungus or a disease that likes to attack the grapevine leaves and the fruit later in the season. And so we kind of have to get on a regimen of these sprays to combat mildew. But what we do is choose things that are very soft chemistries. They're organic approved and biodynamic approved sprays that are very soft and don't have like collateral damage, if you will, to the beneficial insects. And so what we see a lot of out in the vineyard, our ladybug population is huge. We have a lot of lacewings. So things like that are predatory to the bad insects. But as nature being nature, there always has to be a balance. And so in somewhat of an unfortunate way, you can't have the good without the bad. So the things that these predatory insects are feeding on and relying on to keep their species going, we have to have their prey present as well in some sort of fashion. So we can't like have this clean slate void type scenario. You have to learn to kind of accept some population of the bad to be able to achieve the good. But there's always a balance, and I think biodynamics is very good at helping us find that and achieve that.
I would say that's like across the board too. I mean, you see these farmers in Spain that have these like fish farms, but they also have they have that biodiversity. And I think no matter what you're growing, whether it be like plant life or animal life, if you have that biodiversity, you're creating better products overall. And sometimes you need that loss. I'm sure when you guys moved from farming more organically to biodynamically, I'm sure your yields dropped a little bit, and you were like, wow, we're not able to harvest quite as much, but the quality that you're harvesting is much better. And I think that's at the end of the day what it comes down to. I mean, we want we want better wines, we want better grapes, we want better food, we want better fish. And, you know, a lot of that comes down to like more organic, more holistic style farming across the board. And that's like kind of what people should start adopting a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's just that synergy of like, you know, you're talking about the plant life, the animal life, and everything. It's just like creating that ecosystem, you know, that balance and that you know, just more, I guess, for lack of a better term, natural kind of environment, you know, for things to, okay, we're doing this just because it's the right thing to do, and you know, this is what's going to make our land, you know, kind of you know, be better in the long run, etc. It's like, you know, the plants, it's the animals, it's everything that's involved, and so totally on that board.
In terms of your cover cropping, I know we're almost done, but last time I was up there, we talked about you doing 5 different types of legumes and then barley. From what I remember at Petarivsky.
Yeah. We are using the legumes, and we're actually currently just have 2 in the mix. We used to have 3 legumes mixed in with the barley, but currently we're down to the fava bean and the sweet pea. Those are our 2 legume mixes with the barley. We used to use one called purple vetch, but it's kind of a climber, and it used to just like get everywhere all over the trellis of the vineyard, and it became kind of a management nightmare. So we pulled that out of the mix. But like I was kind of touching on earlier, there's many books on it, and I need to get more well-versed, but there's many studies on how different crops are mineralizing different nutrients from the soil, and then when they get turned back into the soil, they're releasing them. And so we're like just at the starting edges of trying to understand, like, what do we need in those mineralizations, and what can we use as cover crops that are, you know, safe to use in the vineyard to kind of expand that biodiversity of our cover crop land. So hopefully in years to come, we'll be able to kind of branch out into some new realms that way.
Cool.
Yeah.
We all talk about minerality in wine, and I feel that it rides really high in our wines. And of course I incorporate concrete, but I also notice it in the barrel aged to barrel fermented wines. Do you sommeliers find that more in biodynamically farmed wine? Like, what is it's like one of those amorphous topics. It's there, but it's hard to put your finger on.
I mean, yeah, for me, I think I find it a lot in Paso wines. I think that was a big part of Chuck bringing us out there last year. And one of his main points was like notice the minerality. Like, the minerality is there. And for me, like, minerality is so important. I think it's a lot easier to get fruit in your wines. It's easy to get those floral qualities. You can always harvest a little bit late, but getting that minerality, it adds a different component. It adds a whole different dimension to the wine, you know? Like, a lot of these people are, you know, releasing these wines that are slightly two-dimensional, you know? You're like, oh, it's got fruit, it's got sweetness and alcohol, it has a little bit of acid, but being able to have that minerality is like that point, that characteristic that a lot of people can't pick up on, you know? And for me, both of these wines have this kind of like crushed rock. It's not like wet river rock, and it's not like rain on asphalt or anything. It's literally like crushed rock. That's immediate. You can almost taste that calcareous limestone, that clay. And for me, it really comes through, and that's what you want. That gives you the idea that this wine isn't being covered up by anything. And for me, minerality is one of the most important things, especially in terms of pairing. I mean, having something, those non-fruit characteristics is always really important. What do you think, Rafa? Oddly
enough, I actually find minerality to be fairly subjective, but also very textural. You know, so to me, like, you know, some things like when I drink a wine, you know, that, you know, was planted in like limestone, let's say, or something like, you know, very high calcium, it always has a bit more focus. It always has a bit more of that, like, kind of linear, like, you know, just cut. Whereas where you have, like, you know, a different wine, let's say from, you know, something more clay-like, marl, etc. Like it almost like fleshes out in the palate. So to me, minerality, you could smell it and taste it, but for the most part, it's a texture for me. So like, you know, I kind of like I try to kind of do it like that, because everyone, you know, has different taste buds. And so like sensitivities are all different. But, you know, what I find in these two wines that we're tasting right now, the 16 and the 19 Blanc, is actually a continuity. It's really that like, what do you call this? It's that common thread. You know, to me, they both kind of start off with like the aromatics, flavor, slight bit of that bitterness, which is very welcome. And then it finishes with that kind of minerality. And it's like that finish that I find like, okay, like that's why you could drink this with food. Like,
yeah. Once the fruit disappears, you start to get that minerality.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah, I completely agree. For me, like even tasting Chablis, one of my favorite things about Chablis is it has this kind of crunchy quality, you know, and it's hard to describe it to the people that way, where it's like, oh yeah, Chablis is great. Yeah, it's kind of crunchy, and you're like, what are you talking about? It's kind of crunchy. But it's like, it does, and that's like, that is the minerality. So I love like the textural component, Rafa. That's awesome.
That makes a lot of sense. Like to describe it, you gather all these ideas that you hear people talk about, and then you can use them to help people understand what you're saying. Because I feel like it's crushed rock. It's like a light colored rock. Like it's obviously limestone or shale, but it seems when you crush it, like it's gravel or it's white. It's something like not dark and heavy.
Absolutely.
And it tastes like that too. Like it's not just like chalky, but these wines have great acidity, but it's not the acid that you finish with. It's the minerality.
Yeah. And that's like, I think something too, in terms of like winemaking and grape growing. I mean, I think it's a lot easier to create a wine that is like slightly overripe and it has all these fruity characteristics, but it's so much harder to kind of convey that minerality. And from a sommelier standpoint, it's always more interesting when you have a wine that is slightly more mineral driven, because you're like, wow, you know, it's tougher to do, it's tougher to convey, and it's really easy to cover up with different aspects in terms of like when you harvest, how much oak you use, all these different things. So it's always fun to have those wines, and that always, for me, bumps the wine up, I mean, in terms of quality.
Totally, that's so cool. I'm so excited. Makes me just want to I love making this wine. So a couple things I want to mention is that we're going to hang out on Zoom for any questions, and we can let the video in on people. I'm sorry, my internet's not great today. I think there's something going on. It's been like this all week at Epoch. I'm not sure. But hopefully you've been able to hear me okay. And, but we're going to stay on Zoom for questions, and we'll actually talk about how to get some Epoch wines and hear what everyone has to say. One of the things I didn't say, which I think is really cool about the white, is that the Viognier is kind of the marker of the vintage, because it's the first grape that we pick. And the moment that we pick it, it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the year. So our earliest vintage ever was 2015, and our white, the Viognier, we started from Pederowski, we started picking on the 14th or the 15th of August. It was so early. And that year was so early, and it's our earliest year and our quickest year. So I feel like that is the gauge, and I really appreciate this wine for that as well, because it's just always, you know, it's the beginning of the vintage, but then the Roussanne gets picked way late, so it kind of hangs out the whole time.
Do you want to Miguel asking Rafa, like what would you pair with this from your restaurant?
Oh, dude, I have a few things that I actually. So I have the 16 and the 19. Like very briefly, I'm gonna say that, you know, the 16 was a lot more savory, a lot of spice, slight bit of that kind of beeswax thing going on. Whereas the 19 really jumps out with a lot of the florals, the fruit, the freshness, and finishes with a lot higher acid, in my opinion, than the 16 did. But things that I would pair with it, I'd probably say for the 19, which is kind of the lighter, fresher. You know, I guess it's because it's a bit more recent vintage, and it may be because of the vintage itself. But I would actually do really interesting, challenging deep fried artichokes with lemon aioli would be really good for this wine. I think like this is a wine that is equipped to actually go with harder to pair items. You know, things like artichokes, white asparagus with like just a little bit of that parsley oil and caviar, like that's like a dish that we had, and I'm just like, visualizing that as I drink it for the 19. You know, things like Branzino, like, you know, Branzino just stuffed with a little bit of lemon, really, really good. Whereas the 16, a totally different, you know, kind of flavor profile. I would do it with, I thought like chicken, but one of the big things that I was thinking about earlier was pork chops and like peach or apricot, because there's a lot of, you know, that peach apricot kind of, you know, vibe on the palate. But, you know, I think this is a wine that could stand up to pork, most definitely. I do love pork, so.
Do you think that the age helps the wine? You know, I feel like it's like we talked about the baby fat last time, Zach, and like it makes it more complex in a way, a little bit heavier. It depends on the vintage, but we'll see how the 19 sort of develops along that track.
I'm actually interested to see like how the 19 develops, because I do think that the 16, at least that I have in the glass, it's, as you mentioned earlier, it's a lot more serious. You know, it really doesn't show itself immediately. You know, that 16 is a little more bass tone, as opposed to the 19 is a lot more like high tone. Really shows a lot of the florals and the fruit, etc., and even the acidity and the freshness like out there. But the 16 to me is something that you could kind of use like with a pairing to just kind of go with, yeah, as opposed to like, you know, try to, you know, go against it.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's a lot more diverse maybe in what you could use.
Maybe it's just the age. Maybe it's just the years.
It could. So one thing we're doing with the 19 vintage, which everyone who's still on could watch for. So we actually divided the 2019 white into an early bottling and a longer age. So we kept the Foudre, the oak cask, full of the 19 to just see how it develops, because we always feel like we're rushing. Well, I'm going to say rushing, but we want to get it to bottle soon so that we can get it out and people can enjoy it in the summer. But we really want to know what would happen with more barrel or more cellar aging. So the 19 will have a second bottling, and we'll be able to compare and contrast those two in the future.
So stoked. I love that Raph, like, a mouth dropped. I'm so excited.
Isn't that, I don't know, we'll see what happens, but it's like one of the things we just did.
No, which is so cool, you know? And I think, I mean, for me, I think we had a big talk about aging and what that means with your wines or wines in general. But it's like, I think for whites, it's almost even more subjective. You know, I had my mom taste both of these wines. And you know, she's all about the 19, you know, it's got more fruit, and I personally prefer more age. I think Raph and I both like something that's got that ageability, seeing what wines do with some age. But, you know, like he was saying, you know, 19 does have these kind of like tropical aromatics, that pineapple, that young white peach, and a little bit of that kind of like nectarine florality coming on, that orange blossom, which I always love. And I think for me, like dishes on my menu, we do like a poisson cru, which is like a Tahitian style ceviche with coconut milk, and you kind of want a little bit more of those tropical flavors coming in. You know, it's got a bit of intensity, but it's got a lot of qualities that carry through the characteristics that you want. You know, it balances the richness, balances out the jalapeno in that dish, and it doesn't quite overpower the actual fish, you know.
That's so cool.
Or hamachi or anything else. I mean, it works really well. And I think that's something that's hard to find with a lot of these white Rhone blends. Where with age, you know, you tend to get a lot more of these secondary characteristics. So for me, I want to go with something that's big and rich. You know, this isn't something that I personally think salad with. I think it's going to overpower those greens. You know, in general, you want something more delicate. We do a mackinac crusted mahi dish with a sake butter reduction with some maitake mushrooms. And, you know, for me, that's kind of the wrap that I would go with the 16, something that's got a little bit more age, that's like working on that minerality, that's not overpowering, but from the Grenache Blanc kind of has that acidity to cut through that sake butter reduction, make that fish shine, as well as like, you know, balancing out a little bit of the richness in the wine and bringing out those fruity components. I would think that might be a dish where you kind of go back and forth just to balance your palate. Every time you have a bite of fish, you kind of want to go back to the wine just to kind of cleanse your palate. So
could you deliver it to me? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just send one out.
I love that right now. Can I get takeout? I was going to tell if anyone wants to unmute themselves or turn their video on and ask a question, we would love that. Now is the time for that. So please do it so we can all have a chat. Last time too, Zach was telling me I foolishly, I don't know, I'm not a really great promoter, but if you want to buy any Epoch wines, they're available on our website, epochwines.com, and we have free shipping. It's not free, sorry. It's included in the normal bottle price, okay? It's not free. So, but it is free. So you can even give one bottle to yourself, and that price is included. And the normal bottle price is if you visited the tasting room. We also, Nicole, our tasting room manager, was going to come on. I'm not sure if she's on or not, but we are going to have, we have virtual tastings, as if you have a group of friends for a birthday or whatever, and you want to have a tasting of Epoch wines, you can order them, and we can have someone from our tasting room staff, which is super fun, lead you through the tasting. And also, before we get to any more questions, we're going to have a Thirsty Thursday next week with Braden and Kristen talking about our 2009s. So that should be really fun, opening some library wines. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Come on, biodynamic stuff. Now's the time. Diehards. I don't know if anyone. Oh, someone can't unmute. Okay. I can unmute. I think I can unmute you. Sorry, excuse my. I'm trying to figure all of this out. Here we go. Unmute, Dan. I can't unmute you. Okay. Oh, there he is. I want to turn your video on too.
Hey, yeah. Well, I look like a troll doll, so.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Dan.
What's up, Dan?
Hi, everybody.
On.
Great job, guys.
Thank you.
So talk a little more about acid in these wines and the effect either the climate or the soil has on, the overall effect on of the wine.
One of the things I wanted to touch on really quickly too, because it's this misnomer, or it's not a misnomer, it's just really confusing and I don't have an explanation for it, but in Chateauneuf du Pape, which is the inspiration for a lot of our own varieties, or just sort of like the go-to, who we look to, Grenache Blanc there doesn't have a lot of acid. And I've asked winemakers from Chateauneuf, it's really flabby. In Paso, and Grenache Blanc are weird because they do actually have low pH, but not a lot of acidity. But it has this perception here of being very fresh, where I think in Chateauneuf it's a little bit more flabby. It's like the later harvest or just not great acid. I can't explain what the difference is, but that is definitely a marker where Paso Robles is different than Chateauneuf in the growing of Grenache in general, but especially Grenache Blanc. But yeah, vintage definitely affects acidity, and I would say that 19 was I should look at I actually have the information on the two wines here, but 19s definitely had more acid than 16s, I believe. What do you think, Kyle?
Dan, I think you mentioned soil and climate, and I think it would be like a yes plate for me. And I think with the style of farming that we're doing, and many others are, and with building that soil health, I think we're trying to encourage those vine roots to dive deeper down into the soil profile. So I think they reach into this bedrock type profile where the soil isn't mineralized as much as your topsoil is. And so you get this raw mineralization from that bedrock. But secondarily to that, or maybe more importantly, you're reaching down into deeper soil profiles where the moisture is hanging out a little bit more. So we have our warm sunny days, we're in California and we're in Paso. And so that top soil profile really seems to dry out, and that's, I think, is a very easy equation to see grapes or wines lose their freshness because they're just drying out. And so if we have those deep root zones, I think they can hang through those heat spikes and keep that acidity and that freshness a little bit better. Going back to your climate comment, I think that's what makes Paso so extremely unique. in the whole world of wine is that we have these huge diurnal swings, meaning we have warm daytime highs. We can reach triple digits, sure, but when the sun sets and we have our night times, the temperature swing gets quite low, back down into the 50s. So we can see like this 35 to like 45, maybe even 50 degree temperature swing between the daytime high and the nighttime low. And why that's important for me, during the nighttime, the grapevines are respirating. So they're doing the opposite of photosynthesis. And during those cool temperatures, they're respirating slower. And so they're not like burning off those acids that they have within their grapes because of those cooler climates. Where if we're talking about like the California Central Valley, where, you know, it still gets triple digits in the day, but it only cools down to like 90 at night. It stays really hot at night. And so those grapes are just respiring at a rapid rate, and they're just burning off all those acids, those organic acids they have within the grape. So I think, to sum it up, it's both soil and climate.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, totally. Actually, the 2016 has higher acidity, but higher pH than the 2019 has lower acidity, but lower pH. But they're pretty close. Like, so there's the pH conversation and there's the acidity, the total acidity, and they're kind of, yeah, it's hard to know which one is playing with your mouth, but if you've had a wine that has high pH and high TA, you'll know, because it's got this like really out of balance acidity with it, and it's like soapy but acid driven, and it's usually because of an addition.
Ah, right. So how do the sommeliers think about acid?
Zach, you want to go first?
I love acid, don't you?
But
In wine.
But the acid to me is always a perceived acid. It doesn't necessarily have to reflect like what is the actual acid, you know, in the wine. It's a perceived acidity. You know, kind of drinking a lot of Italian wines and whatnot. You know, I love acidity. I really enjoy it. Whites, reds, etc. But it's always like how it comes across on your own palate that I think is most important, because that's what leads into, you know, what do we drink this with? And it, you know, usually because of my experience, like, you know, kind of drinking a lot of Italian wine, again, it's like, it's that acidity that you drink it with food. Like, you know, wine is meant to be with food. And so acid is very important in my world, but it's really perceived acidity that I think is most important. And so you could kind of tell sometimes when it's like fake acidity. You know, it's like, okay, that feels like really manufactured, that's acidified, etc. But when you kind of get a bit more of a natural acidity, like, you know, on the palate, like that's, again, it comes back to texture, and that's what I have to say. Zach?
Can anyone talk? Are you guys having a hard time talking? I don't know why everyone's like getting muted.
Was that
Everyone's unmuted, right?
You heard me, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, Zach is totally mute though. Yeah? Couldn't
Zach's muted.
Oh, how are you muted? Okay, unmute.
Okay, cool.
There we are.
Perfect. That wasn't letting me unmute. There we go.
I don't know what's going on? Everyone's supposed to be able to unmute themselves right now, but apparently
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, you like that? Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of like wine pairing in general, like acid is unbelievably important. So it's like, that's something that we always want. And I think for me, that's something that kind of drives me away from a lot of white grown blends, is there's not enough acid overall. And people really the right things to make their wine more enjoyable with food, and that's basically having too much acid across the board. And I think certain varietals, you know, people are, they're doing too much Viognier and they're harvesting it too late. It's not working. But across the board, like I always like your wines with our got that acid, and you want it with it's got those tropical flavors too. So you really want it with like Hawaiian food. For me, it's the perfect kind of wine for our cuisine across the board. Oh yeah, Toiga.
Hey, sorry guys. I was in the middle of baking bread and also my look at these bad girls right here.
Wow.
Huge. Not too shabby.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I invited Toiga on. So Toiga's the lead sommelier at the Mill House on Maui. His restaurant's awesome. He got highest score
Your name down.
on his advanced most recently. So
He's a Rudd stud.
oh yeah.
Hey, guys.
Congrats, that's amazing.
Thank you so much. I actually I got a chance to visit your winery in 2018 when I went to the Young Sommelier Nationals competition in Paso. So I took a day after the competition was over and I went through Paso and visited a bunch of wineries, and yours was one included, and it was fantastic.
Thank you. That's
Yeah, yeah. Talking about acidity though, so I feel like Zach and Rafa have been reading my mind with most of the questions and things that I've been needing to ask. So I've been pretty set with these two as my moderators. Thank you for working for me like that. But as far as the acidity, kind of like with the conversation of minerality, how I feel it's very subjective and definitely shows itself more from a textural perspective. I find that acidity can sometimes play that way, especially for Rhone varieties. How the textural profile of how the acid sits on the palate is very unique. And I didn't hear if we were talking about any malolactic conversions for your white wines, or if it was, or if you are trying to stop those for any reason as well.
Yeah, we do not want malolactic to happen.
Okay.
So, actually, and that's what's interesting, the 19, so we don't use a lot of sulfur, but we sulfur at the end of fermentation to make sure the malolactic doesn't happen. And the normal white is filtered. That's because it goes to bottle in March after the previous harvest. However, our 2018 and 19 Viognier from York Mountain are not malolactic and they're not filtered, which is definitely a little risky. And then the 2019 Epic White, we're planning on not filtering and it's not going through a malt either. So, or sorry, the longer aged one. So when we compare, we're going to compare one that had shorter time in the winery and was filtered, and then one that was barrel aged longer and does not have filtration. So,
are you utilizing cooler temperatures or sulfur to try and mitigate that?
We use sulfur, but not at a high level. Not, I mean, our free sulfur doesn't go higher than 20. So I don't know if you know what that means, but it's not a high level at all. It's just about being really clean for us.
Gotcha.
When wines are younger and you have to go to bottle, stability is an issue, mostly cold stability. And acid, I'm not as worried about the malolactic thing because I dealt with that a lot at Chalk Hill because I bottled Sauvignon Blanc that was unfiltered and non-malolactic. And if you're really clean, you can get through it. But it's really about wines gain stability when they age in the cellar. So the faster you push them to bottle, the less stable they are in all ways.
Gotcha. And then as far as the conversation with biodynamics and organics, because you start with organics and then progress towards the biodynamic process here, yeah? Or you kind of, you focused on biodynamics, but never really kind of said it until you got there. As far as, I worked at some wineries that were biodynamic, but I never actually got a chance to ask them right now. I'd ask you right now. As far as, since you've worked with other conventional and organic farming wineries as well, it seems, what is the cost association between a biodynamically farmed and organically farmed? I mean, even though that you are utilizing like home cattle and home preparations to try and manage some of those expenses, but what kind of expense differentiation are you looking at between the two?
Yeah, good question. I'll field that, and I think that the simple answer is that when you get into this organic and this biodynamic realm, you're very hands-on, and so it's a labor cost. And so what we see mostly is like it is pricier not because of you know, inputs or anything like that, but it's because you rely heavily on hand labor, and that is never really. Did you hear me okay?
Kind of. Like I said, my service here is kind of, but labor costs, of course, are you, and the amount of passes that you got to do through your vineyard to do your sprays and to do your applications is much more too as well, yeah?
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Are you guys using, like, at the winery that I worked for, they had like an ATV that was outfitted with a like compost sprayer and everything. Are you using any devices like that to try and lower your footprint?
For sure, for sure. Actually, most of our biodynamic sprays are done with ATVs, and we have little tanks set up on front and back with a little spray boom off the back, and so they just kind of zip around in those, which is really great. Obviously, creating less compaction in the soil and much easier or softer impact on the environment, no doubt.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, your wines are fantastic. So you can definitely see that transparency in the quality of the stuff that you're producing.
Thank you.
You guys are using you guys implemented a goat or sheep program recently?
Yes, sheep more than the goats.
Yeah.
This is one of those trial and error things. We did have a picture of them, and we do have them. I'll let Kyle talk a little bit more about the animals.
This might not be one of our like main success stories, but I'll tell you the current situation, and then I'll backtrack to like where we were. So currently we still have sheep and goat, and we're using them to graze on our open range land. We still have quite a bit of acreage that's not planted to vineyard, and so we use them to help control weeds and grassland and stuff outside of the vineyard. But I think it must have been a year or two ago now, we had started with just a small herd of sheep, and we were trying to graze them within the vineyard. And the idea is that the ruminant animals, so sheep and goats and cows, they have these amazing digestive systems. And so when they, you know, eat grasslands and stuff, they convert it into their manure, which is like super high quality for composting and for the ground. I heard someone put it at one point that the ruminant stomachs is like the rainforest. So when they're grazing, it's like bringing that kind of rainforest element to your land, which I think is really neat. Anyway, so we tried to bring them into the vineyard for that reason, for the soil health, but also we found specifically out at York Mountain, we can get a high amount of rainfall each winter season. So much so to where when we need to go manage our vineyard floor by mowing and doing our mechanical weed abatement, it's too difficult to get tractors in because it's so wet. It would be a nightmare both for soil compaction and worker safety and all that stuff. So we were like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to get animals in that don't compact as much? It doesn't matter if it's too wet because they're animals and they can graze the land, and it'll be like composting in the field as they're grazing. The problem that we saw is that out at that York Mountain site, we can get bud break quite early. And so if the cover crop hasn't grown in enough to do this job, we've got to wait, which is past bud break. And then you're putting in animals that like would much prefer to eat grapevines. And so we tried to string like electrical wire and stuff to keep them off the vines and keep them focused on the ground cover. And it was a quick experiment to realize that that was not working. So we've pulled back on having them in the vineyard.
Yeah. That's always something that I always think about.
Yeah. Totally.
It was really great in theory.
It was great in theory. And I think that it's still great. Like if your vines are totally dormant, there's people that are grazing, you know, during dormancy for sure, no problem. But I think for us with our cover crop, we want that to grow in nice, thick, and lush because that root system is just adding to our organic matter in the soil. So we really prize some hefty cover crop growth. And by the time we need to get, or by the time we want to actually control that, it's bud break, and then we've lost our opportunity to graze. So for us, it's a difficult timing issue.
Yeah, but we have so much property that we have them grazing. The sheep and the goats are like together in harmony, and they're grazing on all the open land to decrease the thistle population and the mustard population. So it's kind of like a win-win for, you know, we all heard about with the fires, I think it was last year, right?
Yeah.
Jordan, so I do. So I did want to ask, like, I heard you talking about the actual acreage that you own, I mean, that Epoch owns, and are you going to for planting more, or do you think that the actual land that you have already has kind of reached its with regards to what gets planted where and how that affects the entire biosphere there? Yeah.
We definitely have a lot more blocks that we can plant on the property we own, properties we own. We are very selective in exposure now. So that's also what's different about Epoch. We have a lot of properties, so we're not just planting every square inch of what we have. We know that Syrah does well in the cooler exposures and pastorals, and we're not willing to plant the hot ones to Syrah just because we have the property. So we have a lot more really good A+ slopes as well that we just haven't gotten to yet, but we're not gonna, I just don't see us planting 100% to just because that's what we have. And so we're really fortunate that way too. We want to conserve water. We want to plant what's right in the right spot. And so it's like a piecemeal thing. The one thing working with the Armstrongs has been really great is that they take the long view. They're not in a hurry.
Yeah.
We made our wine for years at Denner Vineyards before we built a winery, and we were lucky to be able to be at Denner. I know some people have to rush because they didn't have a place to be. That's good. But we had a great place to be, but we also didn't rush.
Let me know when you need some help.
Anytime, Rafa. Anytime. Come down. Even for a day, 2 days, we'll put you up. You can work harvest. We actually have interns return. All of our interns returning this year worked with us last year, so we didn't even have to do an intern search. They just wanted to come back. We were like, "Where you guys have already been trained. You're amazing." Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe the 2020 wines will be even better.
Okay. So what is the production that you're doing right now, and what is the production capacity of your facility that you have, like your winery?
So we are, every year it's been a little different, but we're around 7,500 to 8,000 cases through 2019. We're actually going to produce less in 2020 because we decided to sell a little bit more fruit from our Catapult vineyard. That's because the York Mountain Vineyard is coming on, and we have another planting from Podorevsky that's coming on as well. So it's kind of a moving target depending on where our needs are, and we have really close relationships with some people we sell fruit to. But I mean, our facility, it's the same question. Like if we wanted to use every square inch and like just go completely crazy and not make wines the way we wanted to make them, but making wines the way we want to make, we could probably go up to 10,000 here. But above that, it might be compromised in terms of decision making.
A lot of tight tank spacing, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, every vintage is different that way too. So there's some vintages where it all comes in no matter how many, you don't get that, what do they say, like 1.5 turns per tank per fermenter for that vintage. Because Mauvais has to come out, so many weeks after Syrah or whatever, but like it doesn't happen some years. Those are the very difficult years, but we're pretty fortunate. We get creative. We like small fermenters. We ferment in barrels. We definitely ferment in puncheons. We ferment in T-bins. Gosh, we ferment in porta tanks. What else have we fermented in? Well, we like to ferment in the things we want to ferment in. So we don't want to be forced. Oh, yeah, Kristen's trying to get you to work on the days here too, Raphael. I just saw that. Awesome, K2's great. That's what we call her, K2. So good.
I want to read you guys a little something that my daughter smelled. So we opened the wines at around 3:30, I think. And I had my daughter smell it because I needed an expert to tell me what the wine smelled like. So for the 19, she said, just really quick, fresh fruit, perfumey, floral citrus, mango, not a lot of pineapple, no berries, peach apricot, cuties, easier to smell and lighter. That's what she said for 19.
Oh my gosh.
19, spice.
Half the things I said.
It's like,
I thought you took your notes from her.
you know,
I always have Rafa's daughter like text me notes on varietals just so that I know what I should be saying.
she is legit. Like she's 8 years old and she is a beast.
Does she like wine?
Yes, she does.
Okay. Does she also like what do they call, like, super tasters for other kind of different tasting
I have
foods?
no idea, but she's very sensitive. Like she comes downstairs from the upstairs and she tells me she smells something, and it's
Wow.
really fascinating. You know,
That's cool.
she has a nose for sure.
Does she like milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
Say what?
Does she like milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
She does not like chocolate.
Oh, it's too strong, maybe?
Yeah, her brother likes dark chocolate. She does not like chocolate. I think she's very sensitive.
Wow, that's so interesting.
She likes a lot of fruit and stuff like that, and florals. Like she told me about the florals on the 19. It reminds her of when we were in the nunnery a week ago for a hike, and it was a bunch of orange and lemon blossoms.
Wow,
And I was like, that is really amazing.
that's cool.
Hear my wine when we have to write wine notes.
It's so easy to do with Viognier too. I mean, any Rhone blends, it's like there's a mountain of things that you smell, you know.
Agreed. But yeah, no,
I
I
love the bingo.
had a great time today, man.
Thank you. Thank you guys.
You guys, I had a great
Internet
time.
is bad, but
Yeah, I love that Toyga came on too. Thanks, brother.
Toyga, miss you, bro.
Sorry, you guys are kind of, I know you're going in and out, but I absolutely love you guys, and it's really good to see you, for sure. I mean, you're all in California. I'm here in Maui, like some shit. I feel bad.
Yeah,
You guys are all
we're
close
so
to the
crushing.
wineries. Clearly, you're in a better place than I am. As I go surf.
Toyga, did you have any other
I'm sorry?
questions regarding biodynamics in the vineyard side or anything else?
No, I loved it. No, so far, that's pretty much everything I needed to hear.
Great,
There you go, man.
cool. Thanks for
Awesome.
joining.
No.
being interested in biodynamic stuff and tuning in.
For
So
sure,
great to
for
have.
sure. No, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I gotta finish up before I go for a run. So I'm gonna catch you guys later. All right, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to talk to you. All right, see ya.
Toyga, aloha.
Aloha.
Very good.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well,
Fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
absolutely, guys. Thank you so much. This was awesome. The wines are drinking beautifully. I mean, just ridiculously good. I know the last thing that I want to talk about is I know that Jordan has told me in the past that she's never that crazy about white Rhone blends. So in terms of making one, how do you think that kind of influenced your decisions in terms of vinification versus like viticulture, and you know what you wanted
oh,
that you wanted to drink? I know, I'm sorry.
That's a good question. Can you guys hear me okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
In and out. That's so true. I was just hell-bent against soapy, high pH, flabby, mostly Viognier, but Roussanne too. And I just didn't want to put it in my mouth, and I didn't want to make it. And so the whole idea of this white has always been to be refreshing and crisp. And, you know, because the acid is, I don't want to adjust the acid so much. And so that's sort of where the concrete fermentation came in, to highlight the minerality as well. I want to keep this wine super fresh. And it was just a trial. Like, we bought 1 egg, and then we bought 2 more eggs when we were still at dinner, and they were the small 150-gallon ones, and we could transport them. And then when we moved to our own winery, we bought more concrete, or larger concrete vessels for fermentation from Italy. And I think that plays a huge part. Larger vessels to not allow the oxidation. Somebody work really well with it, depending on the year, but a very small percentage. But then I went to balls, and that was almost like too much. Like it was like bubble gum. You know, when I get that like Trident pink bubblegum flavor. I didn't like that. So I was like, no, that's not what I want. And so the concrete gives so much seriousness to the wine. Puncheons do, the large oak cask seems to be yielding that. But having it be Grenache Blanc dominant, but always having Viognier and Roussanne. In 2014 was Grenache Blanc and Viognier, and that was a great wine, but it just never had the gravitas that the other years did. And we'll see how it ages. It's still tasting okay, but I don't think that it is developing the same way because it didn't have Roussanne. So, you know, it's trial and error, but I think having Grenache Blanc is the lead. Again, there's some years we didn't. 17, the Viognier edged it by like 1 or 2%, which is, it's close. But that wine is obviously Viognier driven.
Yeah. I mean, I think that varietal overall always tends to, you know, it jumps out. I mean, I think that across the board, anybody, I don't know about anybody, but like most of us that are like in that Somm community would taste this, and you know, we would go Viognier. You know, that's what jumps to my mind. And it's not necessarily a varietal that I like very much, but I really enjoy drinking this. You know, both of my bottles are almost gone. So, Dan, what do you think about white Rhone blends overall?
Yeah, which ones do you drink?
Which white Rhone blends do I drink?
Yeah.
Yours, sure.
Besides Epic. I hope you drink ours. I'm not sure how much of it you buy. We'll have to check.
You know, not a lot actually. I tend to think the way you do about them being a little flabby and lacking, you know, acid and structure. So one of the reasons I love Jordan's wine is because I think there's a greater sensitivity towards acid that you don't see in a lot of other whites. Because I think they can tend to be overripe and uninteresting. So, you know, I just drank a Chenin Blanc from Domaine UA last night, the 17, which I thought had tremendous acid in it, which I really appreciated. It's one of the things that I love about Jordan's rosés as well. I think she does a great job with maintaining the acid or the perceived acid in the wine. And that's what I think, that freshness or acid or whatever we want to call it, is what attracts me as a consumer, for sure.
Did you drink Les Hautes-Loups or Les Monts?
Les Monts.
Yeah, Les Monts.
Yeah, it's screaming right now.
Talk about the acid on Les Monts though, and the minerality. God.
Right. And that's the one thing I as a consumer, I'm trying to understand the cross section, like the intersection between the soil, the winemaking choices, the climate, all those things, and what am I experiencing, right? So I love the licking rocks thing, and I've actually driven down near Paderewski and snuck on and grabbed a piece of rock. But you know, like just trying to understand the connection there, because it's equal parts artistry and alchemy in my mind. But yeah, they have to all come together for it to be enjoyable, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what this is all about too, is like really just like us connecting Kyle and Jordan and trying to see, I mean, that's what makes your wine so amazing is kind of the connectivity between the two of you, and kind of seeing the transference between what you're doing in the vineyard site and having Jordan showcase that in the wines. And it really does come through. And from a sommelier standpoint, that's one of the most beautiful things that you can get in a wine. That's something that I look for. And it's not something that, you know, you can get everybody excited about. It's not something that every guest can come in and you're like, you have to try this. This is exactly what like this vineyard site is like, and they're doing these things, and not everybody's excited about it. But at the end of the day, it's something that sommeliers really want, is being and seeing the connection between your soil, what you're doing to the vine, to the grapes, and then interpreting that into the wine without covering it up it's really impressive, guys. So kudos to the both of you. Thank you.
What is that?
Scary, right, Kyle?
Go ahead. Sorry, Jordan. Go ahead.
Oh, I think it's definitely scary. A lot of
It's basically being able to talk to your chef.
Oh, sorry.
You're breaking up, Jordan.
I'm sorry, my internet's going out.
No, it's all good. But what I'm saying to Zach was like, and to everyone that's still on, is it's basically being able to communicate to your chef. It's being able to talk to your chef. It's like, you know, as a sommelier on this side, like being able to talk to chef and like see like what's going on and being able to create that kind of synergy. And then, you know what, it's all about consumers' experience and like, you know, how do we make this better? And it's great to see that you guys are, you know, in sync.
Yeah, I think
Number one goal.
that's a really good point too. I mean, like my experience at Acquerello was one of the best. If you haven't had a chance to dine at Rafa's restaurant, it is out of this world. Highly recommend. But there's a certain kind of appreciation towards the ingredients. You know, you'll do a couple dishes where there's like, you know, there's 4 main ingredients, but each of those ingredients shine. And I love the kind of reference towards the head chef, because that's what that chef wants to do. That is like the winemaker in the wine. What he wants to do is make those chanterelle mushrooms shine that came from this tiny little farm, you know, make sure that like his pasta shines and like you get the tooth, you get every ingredient that comes in. And I think I relate that in the same way to winemaking, where, you know, you get those characteristics overall. So I think that was actually a really nice analogy.
I'm glad that you were able to come in years ago. But yeah, chef's mommy, like she is amazing. Like, you know, she really like is a beast. You know, she's been in the industry for so long, but you know, she also like, you know, when I need to talk to her about some things, I pull her aside and I'm like, hey, we need to adjust this and all that. And she's always open to that. And it's that like dynamic that I also see that's, you know, that would make it great. It's actually like, you know, no egos. It's just what is the best for the guest? What is the best for the consumer? You know, what could we do to make this a more pleasurable experience for everyone? And that's what I find, you know, tasting your wines and like seeing how, you know, both of you talk, and, you know, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Hey, Rafa, I come into the winery all the time and tell Jordan what she needs to tweak and change.
I can't do that with chef, bro.
Chef, much more lemon juice, it'll be fine. Just add more lemon juice, it'll be okay.
Really, like the opinions of the people that I trust. So like Kyle is out seeing all the vines all the time. It's like it's so important to listen to everyone and not have the ego get in the way, like you said, Rafa. It's so important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. This is so awesome. I can't wait to come. Am I saying it right? Acquerello?
Yeah.
Okay. But I will be there. I can't
Let
wait.
me know when you go. I'll just come up with you. Bring the hubby.
Perfect.
Shows up. Zach shows up all the time.
Like, how are you on the mainland? I don't know, but you're here.
Well, we will see.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, Dan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Much love.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello, guys. Look forward to you soon.
Bye, guys.